Can a single technical modification change the fate of a whole team in Formula One? And what happens when that change is combined with the most successful pilot in history? In Spa-Francorchamps, Lewis Hamilton and Ferrari gave a masterclass. But what surprised the paddock was the reaction of his boss, Frédéric Vasseur. The SF-25 was born as a machine with great aspirations, but its initial performance revealed a deep disconnection between theory and reality. From the first tests in Bahrain, Ferrari engineers noticed something disturbing. The car only gave in a very narrow range of conditions. This meant that outside that almost perfect range, any small deviation in temperature, driving height or aerodynamic pressure made it an unpredictable, nervous, and difficult to control car. It was as if Ferrari had created a laboratory car, effective in simulations and wind tunnels, but too demanding for real track conditions. Technically, the SF-25 had a delicate masses distribution and a rear suspension that did not respond progressively to load changes. This caused erratic weight transfers, especially in braking or lateral acceleration phases. In terms of piloting, this meant that the car changed behavior between one curve and another, which is one of the worst scenarios for an elite pilot. And it was not just a feeling problem. The data confirmed those inconsistencies with oscillation graphs in the load and compression sensors. In addition, there was a growing psychological challenge. In each post-career briefing, doubts and frustrations accumulated. The engineering team, led by Vasseur, saw how its most ambitious development could not materialize in consistent results. The mechanics and strategists were tense, and the simulator sessions became more in sessions to search solutions than in specific preparation for each grand prize. Mugello was not simply a private test session for Ferrari. It was a rescue mission. Internally, the team knew that another cycle of disappointments could not afford, such as in Australia and China. The margin of error had been exhausted, and the pressure from Maranello was total. Vasseur, next to the coaching staff headed by vehicle and aerodynamic dynamics engineers, prioritized a structural solution instead of small incremental corrections. Thus was born the new rear suspension geometry of the SF-25. It was not a superficial modification. It was a deep review of the technical concept with which Ferrari had built his car from scratch. The key was in the redesign of the lower triangles of the suspension system. These new components were created with a double intention: to increase the structural rigidity of the rear set and reduce car sensitivity to track height variations. Technically, this update allowed to introduce a more robust anti-lift effect, which helped keep the car stable under braking and when accelerating, leaving slow curves. In other words, Ferrari was eliminating one of the most notorious Achilles heels of the SF-25: his tendency to decompose dynamically when the pilot needed him more. During the tests in Mugello, both Hamilton and Leclerc were instructed to push the limits of the car in different phases of the circuit. Long curves, deep braking, changes of direction at high speed. More than 80 simultaneous variables were collected in real time, from the G-forces on each axis to the behavior of the airflow under the floor of the car. What surprised the technicians was not only the improvement in the chronos. It was the consistency. For the first time from the seasonal start, the sensors showed clean, predictable data, without violent peaks or abrupt losses of adhesion. Hamilton was the first to notice. In his radio reports, he spoke of a fundamental change in the feeling with the car. He felt the rear axle anchored, solid, which allowed him to trust the entrance to curve and lengthen his braking point. He could apply gas before without fear of sudden sliding. This not only improved his times by return, but also reduced mental fatigue during long simulations. When a car responds in a consistent way, the pilot can focus on the strategy, on the tires, on the environment, not in fighting their own machine. Vasseur was informed almost in real time of these results. When he reviewed telemetry and compared Hamilton's patterns before and after the update, his reaction was of authentic surprise. Not because I doubted the pilot's ability, but because finally the work of months began to deliver tangible results. Spa-Francorchamps was not a simple test field for Ferrari, it was the verification field. The mythical Belgian layout, with its combination of high-speed curves, long technical braking, mercilessly exposes any weakness in the balance of a car. For Ferrari, this was the key event to know if the technical package introduced in Mugello was truly the answer or only temporary relief. The SF-25 arrived with its new rear suspension, a new aerodynamic mapping and a base adjustment rebuilt from scratch. But the great unknown was, would Hamilton be ready to exploit all that potential? The weekend began with mixed signs. In free sessions, Ferrari's rhythm was consistent, but not explosive. Hamilton worked silently, focused on adapting his style to the new car behavior. It was no longer just managed to handle subverting or survival, but to reprogram its mental references: braking points, progressive traction, load balance, and medium curve. The car did not react like in Australia. The SF-25 was another machine, but that also meant releasing it. Leclerc, on the other hand, seemed to need more time to understand this new version of the Ferrari, and its frustration became evident in internal comments to the team. Friday's classification was the first real opportunity to show the qualitative leap. And although Hamilton suffered an unexpected spin in the sprint session due to a rear blocking to the limit, chronometric data were revealing. It was among the 3 best sectors in net time. Trust, despite the error, was not broken. Rather, he intensified. Because at a technical level, the car had responded in a controlled way even at the absolute limit. The error did not come from the car, but from a deliberate search for that limit. Something that until then Hamilton had not dared to try with SF-25. But it was in Sunday's main race where everything crystallized. From the departure, Hamilton showed a measured aggressiveness, worthy of his best years. He won without sacrificing positions, managed the rhythm with intelligence, and the most shocking, maintained stability in Eau Rouge, an area that had been critical for the SF-25 in previous races. For the first time in the season, Ferrari was able to be competitive in all sectors of the circuit: traction, tip speed, passage through medium curve. There was no need for extreme commitments in tuning. Everything worked as a coherent unit. The key moment was in Tour 21, when Hamilton made a surgical advancement about George Russell and Les Combs, after taking advantage of the rebufo and a perfect traction in Kemmel. It was not just a clean maneuver, it was a demonstration that Ferrari finally had the tools to execute an offensive strategy, and not just defend itself. In Maranello, the engineers celebrated that action as an unequivocal sign that the work done in Mugello had had a direct impact on real competitiveness on the track. The stop strategy was also crucial. Ferrari chose to extend the first Hamilton stint, taking advantage of the lower wear of rear tires thanks to the revised suspension. This allowed him to do the undercut on the middle group and leave with clean air in his second stint, something that had previously been impossible due to the instability of the car by loading more fuel. The SF-25 maintained its performance, even in variable conditions of temperature and wind, one of the greatest difficulties that dragged from the pre-season. Vasseur, after the race, was visibly excited. He talked about a paradigm shift, and made it clear that Hamilton had not only demonstrated speed, but had validated a technical process that redefined Ferrari's approach for the rest of the championship. In his words, "Today was more than a result. It was a confirmation that we have regained control over our technical development." And Lewis was the axis of that transformation. The performance in Belgium did not only mean valuable points in the championship. It represented the transformation of a frustrated pilot into a confident contender, and of a limited car in a precision tool. Ferrari, for the first time in years, left Spa with more answers than questions. What happened in Spa-Francorchamps was much more than a specific improvement in Ferrari's performance. It was a redefinition of the technical and competitive course of the Scuderia, a turning point that could mark the beginning of a new era for Maranello. The immediate reaction of Fred Vasseur and his technical team after the Grand Prix showed that the true meaning of Hamilton's performance goes far beyond the points obtained. This was not just a successful weekend. It was a validation of a whole process of deep reconstruction that Ferrari had begun since the late 2024, after staying at the gates of the builder's title. This also changes internal dynamics between pilots. Lewis Hamilton has assumed, de facto, the role of the first reference in terms of technical evolution and pilot sensations. Its ability to identify the potential of the new suspension, adapt quickly to it and translate it into real performance, positions it as the cornerstone on which Ferrari can build his attack on the title. Charles Leclerc, although fast, has demonstrated a slower adaptation curve to these changes, and that could influence how certain developments are prioritized from now on. It is not just about favoritism, but technical efficiency. Hamilton feedback has proven to be a valuable tool to accelerate decision-making. Lewis Hamilton has not only found a more stable or fast car. He has found a project in which his voice has real weight, in which his experience translates into high-impact decisions. The SF-25 that piloted in Spa is no longer Melbourne's fragile and erratic car. It is the result of a surgical intervention in the technical foundations of the car, a clear sample that Ferrari can make brave and successful decisions. And when that combines with the hunger of a 7-time world champion that still feels that he has something to demonstrate, an equation is created that worries all his rivals. And yet this is only the first chapter. The real question that remains in the air is not if Ferrari has improved. That is already demonstrated. The question is whether it will be able to sustain this technical evolution, refine it even more, and make it a constant pressure tool about McLaren, Red Bull, and Mercedes. Leave me your opinion in the comments.